Greetings, lobster lovers. Today we're going to be considering the lobster. And we're going to go back to my roots up in Bar Harbor, Maine. Fun fact for you, I really do have family from Bar Harbor, Maine. And they love lobster. So today we're going to be talking about Consider the Lobster. It's a book, and it's an essay. This is by the late David Foster Wallace. And hopefully you've been considering the lobster. But if you haven't, I'm sure you've been considering other stuff. And that's okay too. I hope you're well and safe and surviving, because that's key right now. But if you will with me for a little while, we're going to consider the lobster. So what I have on this here whiteboard right here are 6 writing rules or ideas that you can steal from this essay. So we have, don't let the genre limit you. That's our very first one. So the reason I bring that up initially is because this essay is actually, as you may have found out, a journalism piece written for Gourmet magazine, where David Foster Wallace was asked to go to the Maine Lobster Festival and cover it for Gourmet magazine. And as you found out, he probably took that in a different direction than most journalists would have. So I say, don't let the genre limit you, because he's writing a magazine article, but he's going scientific and historical research. He's super conversational. He's getting into these ethical, philosophical quandaries. He's going everywhere and doing it all. And I know we've had people sort of wrestling with genres and what they can do. And I would just say, be novel, be innovative. Feel free, if you have the desire, to blend and bend your genres, because I think we're in an era that embraces that, and it's really cool. And be innovative, and don't let sort of too many strictures hold you back from the piece that you could write. That's what I'll say. Number 2 is do your research. So for this, I'm going to flip over to page 237. So if you'll flip with me to 237, it's just a couple pages in. We have, on the top part of 237, David Foster Wallace gives us this etymology of the word lobster, where it even comes from, which for me is like a tasty little fact. I love language. I love learning. Here we get a tasty little etymology. And I think an etymology is a cool little thing to steal. He doesn't completely do this, but, well, he does to a degree. He uses the Old English lop, which means spider, and then sort of gets into this being like a giant sea insect. So he does use his etymology to make a point, but I would say exploring the etymology of a word, if you're writing an essay on that topic, is often a really cool way to do things, because I think it can open up just new possibilities where you can kind of explore the implications of that word based on the meaning and where it comes from. And I think it can actually be a tasty little factoid that can lead down some coolio rabbit trails, and you might end up with a narrative spandrel out of an etymology. Just saying, could happen. So after that nice little tasty etymology on 237, we get really, and some before, we get really into this scientific research. We find out that the lobster is a crustacean, aquatic arthropod. We go on, and he gives us all this is right there in the encyclopedia. And I love that line. It's right in the center of 237. And the reason I love it is because I just feel like it's a good suggestion and recommendation to use encyclopedia. So he wrote this in 2003, 2004. He might have actually been using an encyclopedia. But, oh wait, no, maybe he wrote this before that. The Lobster Festival was actually before that, I think. Anyway, he might have been using a physical encyclopedia. We probably would be using Wikipedia. But if you've written papers over the years, which I know you have, you've probably had professors or teachers be like, don't cite Wikipedia. But something I love is in creative writing, Wikipedia might give you the perfect little factoids that are perfect for your essay or poem or whatever. And I just want to say, use Wikipedia. He says all this is right there in the encyclopedia. He got all these yummy facts that I think are just delicious and I want to devour, and science and history abound. And I'm actually using Wikipedia and sort of its attached sources a good amount in my work, and I think it might not be the perfect place to end, but it's a great place to start. And it, for me, engages you in this sort of curious information binge that can definitely lead down a black hole where you actually distract yourself from writing, but can honestly give you research that will just deepen and thicken whatever you're writing about. So use the encyclopedia, do your research, look for etymologies. On to number 3, footnotes. Now, footnotes are used abundantly in this essay, which I really like. I think that you can probably see my bias for tasty little bits of information. Um, but I think they can also be distracting. I've been using footnotes in an essay that I'm writing, and I like them as a way to add things. You can develop your personal voice, which I think he does throughout this essay. You can go on little rabbit trails. One of my favorites in this case is on page 242. He goes on this rabbit trail about debeaking the chickens in factory farms, and he's talking about food ethics, but he's talking about obviously lobster, but we get into like the whole of food ethics and like the analog of taking off a lobster's claws or binding them together with rubber bands like that, is similar to this debeaking process. And anyway, we sort of get into seeing something that if it was stuck in the middle of the essay, it might not have belonged, but I love to follow that little rabbit trail. That might be my crazy mind. But I want to hear about the psychotic pigs that crop off each other's tails, or the cattle or the feedlot cattle who need to be dehorned so that they don't gore each other because of the terrible conditions animals are kept in. I think it really develops his moral argument, but it would feel maybe like too distracting in the block, so I think the footnote is a cool way. But I also see, in terms of distraction, that you want your essay to flow or your poem to flow or whatever, and hopping back and forth between footnotes can obviously kill the flow a little bit, and maybe hurt kind of the beauty and the fluidity of your writing. So I think it's a debate. I'm going to ask you guys about that on the Moodle forum. Be thinking about the footnotes. What do you like about them? What do you not like about them? Would you use them yourself? For sure. Before we move on from footnotes, I just wanted to note some of the tasty factoids that we get. 241, we find out that 80 million pounds of lobster are produced in the U.S. and Maine accounts for half of that. I just love stuff like that. It's pretty great. Moving on, number 4, build scenes and engage the senses. So I've been rattling a lot of stuff off. I'm moving fast. I'm going to slow down a little bit for some story time. If you will, flip in your essays or scroll on your computer screens to page 239 for a little read aloud. So here we are, we're in the Maine eating tent. See, for example, the aforementioned Maine eating tent, for which there is a constant Disneyland grade queue, and which turns out to be a square quarter-mile of awning-shaded cafeteria lines and rows of long institutional tables at which friend and stranger alike sit cheek by jowl, cracking and chewing and dribbling. It's hot, and the sagged roof traps the steam and the smells, which latter are strong and only partly food-related. It is also loud, and a good percentage of the total noise is masticatory. The suppers come in styrofoam trays, and the soft drinks are iceless and flat, and the coffee is convenience store coffee and more styrofoam, and the utensils are plastic. There are none of the special long skinny forks for pushing out the tail meat, though a few savvy diners bring their own. Nor do they give you near enough napkins, considering how messy lobster is to eat, especially when you're squeezed onto benches alongside children of various ages and vastly different levels of fine motor development. Not to mention the people who have somehow smuggled in their own beer in enormous aisle-blocking coolers, or who all of a sudden produce their own plastic tablecloths and spread them over large portions of tables to try to reserve them, the tables, for their own little groups, and so on. I think that built scene is very tasty, and one of the reasons I like it is because it engages the senses. So when we think about building scenes, it's obviously easy to think about visuals. One we get right away is that Disneyland grade queue. It's a nice little metaphor. But what I like is, more than that, is how we get touch, and we get heat, and we get steam and smells, and in this, when you talk about the sagged roof trapping the steam and the smells, and only partly the smells are only partly food related, I can feel the steam and the sweat on my skin. I can think about these giant coolers in the aisles that you might knock your shin on if you came around without looking. I can hear the crunching and the cracking, and think about the feeling of having all this buttery lobster meat just on your hands, and you're sort of, at the table holding your hands like this. You don't want to get all that on your clothes or something. He really develops that. You can smell it, you can hear it, you can feel it on your skin as well as you can see it. And I think that that is something that I would really want to steal in some of my scenes, to think about some of the different ways to engage touch and smell and taste and sound.